faculty. I'm Anand Parthasarathy. I practice in Chennai. 3 of us actually practice in Chennai. Dr. Nirmal, a very senior practitioner with a practice of almost 30 years. Also in Chennai. Kumran, batchmate from Arvind Eye Hospital. He practices in central Chennai. Samresh agreed to join us all the way from Ahmedabad and Jaipur. Your dual role, all right. We would keep some time for discussion. There are a couple of points which may not be covered, which I will put questions to the panelists. The broad outline of the talk is regarding the planning. The building materials will Dr. Samresh will cover. Understanding airflow, extremely important part because almost everything now is going towards having clean air room technology. Regulatory requirements for the operation theatre, Dr. Nirmal will touch upon, and I think that is also extremely important. And then we would have some panel discussions. I will give you a number. If you could WhatsApp the questions to me, I will put it to the panelists. That way the questions can be taken up more and we'll be able to do that. This is the number you can WhatsApp the questions to, and I will put it across to the panelists once we have finish with the presentations part. Just please note the number 979-107-1248. All right, I would start the presentation on planning for an operation theatre. And this is probably the first step you take when you're planning a eye hospital, or if you already have a running eye hospital, you want to add in eye hospital, operation theatre, or you have an existing operation theatre and you want to modify it. Just before I start, just a pop quiz. Anybody know a difference between an FAHU and an AHU? All right, good. By the end of the presentation, I think we should be able to clarify that. Okay, there are multiple resources, and I would encourage you, if you have already read about it, to just go through. There are different models. Can I have a pointer, please? You have a pointer here? Pointer? And the first are basically from overseas, which are broad outlines of some of which we have actually included in our present guidelines as well. The other two, one is from the Arvind Eye Hospital, also available quite free of cost. And all these, if you're really interested, you could probably just mail me and I can mail them to you. These are just PDF documents, but these are broad outlines. Now the Arvind is basically for camp surgery and how to perform that, making that. The RCO, or the Royal College of Ophthalmologists, also has a handout which is fairly good in terms of broad guidelines. May not be specific right now in terms of the NABH requirements though. There are a couple of articles. One is actually from the Journal of Anesthesia, and the other is by two of our panelists published about in 2018 on operation theatres and sterilization requirements, also available on the net. Now in terms of OT planning, I think it is very important that you're looking at fairly specialized planning and execution. It is a combination of something that we have never probably studied in 15-20 years of surgery, which is civil, mechanical, electric, electronics and biomedical. And there is of course now a regulatory requirement. Most of it are broadly for general operation theatres, and OT is of course part of the hospital infection control program. So there is the operation theatre, the post-operative wards, and the sterilization, or also called the CSSD. Now there is of course, when you enter the operation theatre, there are two important points about reaching the operation theatre, and the point about corridors need to have some natural light elements, especially if they are fairly long. You do not want them to be dingy, especially when approaching the operation theatre. It is designed to definitely break monotony, have some artwork. Handrails are meant to be kept at about 1.5 meters, and width needs to be at least about 2 meters, so that there is good movement of a patient with two attenders next to each other comfortably. If you're putting in steps, of course, preferably avoid in the ward and operation theatre preferably. If you're putting in steps in terms of approach to the ward, a low rise with a landing every 12 to 15 steps is important. Low rise means a step height of the steps needs to be fairly low, not more than maybe 5 centimeters is what is recommended. With anything from 1.2 meters is preferable. Now ramps usually are required now by most hospital regulations in terms of having high rise, but if you're planning that as a part of the operation theatre, need to have a textured floor so that there is some grip to the wheels. There has to be a very gradual rise with handrails also at about 1 meter so that a person sitting can hold on to the handrails. The gradient rise or gradient reduction needs to be not more than about 3 to 4 centimeters over 6 meters. This is actually a very gradual rise, slightly more difficult to implement if you're putting in 12 feet height for your floors. But this is recommended, and I'm sure there can be multiple options of having breaks in the gradient so that you have 2 levels. The width, of course, like most things, you need to have space, so 1.5 meters would be a minimum. Now, the other thing is in terms of doors. Doors are extremely important in terms of patient safety. You need to avoid internal threshold. That means when you open, preferably there should be no block. Preferable is, of course, in operation the entries to be about 6 feet, so a stretcher with 2 health attendants can comfortably come out. You can have 2 doors, that is also acceptable, or a single large door. There needs to be a clear marking of the opening on both sides of the door with floor markings exactly what is the excursion of the door, especially when you're putting hinges and they are 3 feet doors, there will be an area which will be a blind spot, and of course you can put, most doors will have a viewing hole or a porthole through which you can see on the other side, but you need to have an excursion limit marked out preferably on the floor so you know how much the door can open and there are no blind spots when somebody comes in and out. The extremely important point, no revolving doors, preferably avoided in all ward and operation theatres. And also an important point which I did read about is preferably not to have round doorknobs. As a person with slightly elderly population, putting round doorknobs are more difficult to open than having the handles, so have handles preferable. Signage, of course, important, clear contrast related with a yellow or a black background, that's probably the best. Exit and fire are important parts of any operation theatre planning where you need to have that. Fire exits for both the clinic and the operation theatre is important. How you would evacuate a patient in terms of an emergency, which could be medical, or in terms of infrastructure or physical emergency also needs to be clarified. Now, there are of course principal points in terms of non-medical and medical, and we will just touch upon part. In terms of in the OPD and the OT layout, this is planning that we had done for about 2,500 square feet floor. This is my operation reception area and the operation theatre, and this needs to have 2 parts. The OT area, which is the main part for which you are actually doing the planning, and try and plan your OPD around or your reception area around the OT. So make the OT planning first and then you add in the space around. And if you see that this is not working. Alright, I'll use the mouse. So this is the operation theatre area where you have a separate door entry, changing rooms for the doctors and the patients have different entry and exit points, and they then the patient has one. This is a single practitioner OT, so the entry point is here. You have the sterilization which can pass through the cleaning, the sterilization, and then directly into the OT, and I'll show you some pictures of that. The OT reception and attending waiting area needs to be of course fairly relaxed with a good amount of open area, and if you really want to put a TV which may or may not relay the surgery live is up to you. Now what we realized when we were doing the planning was that you need to have probably different vendors for the OT and the OPD because there are fairly different skill sets. Communication between the vendors is critical. Occasionally the height variation for OPD may vary for the OT, especially in the ward. So if you're looking at OPD, you're looking at maybe about 10 to 12 feet of height with the air conditioners. While in the OT, you can even keep it from 8 to 10 feet. So make sure that when you're putting in the air conditioning piping, this basically matches for both. And for the operation theatre, preferably avoid multiple vendors because there are different parts to it. So if you give the same person, he would have his contractors to do the electrical, the antechamber, AC lining, and also the lighting for that. Beware of market prices in terms of materials. This is something we realized when we actually were building our second hospital, that there is almost about 10 to 15% gap between what the vendor would quote to you and what you would get in the market. So if you have connects, or you can find a good vendor for the materials, you can also give him a contract only for the labor part and making, and you procure the materials. If your vendor is not willing to do that, make sure you're aware of the market prices, especially for panels, steel, because these come as panels and they would charge you for square feet. So that's a small trick that we learned later. In terms of OT planning for infrastructure, remember that the structural design needs to be for appropriate road, important especially if you're having one first story or second story operation theaters. Water supply and plumbing, extremely important, almost like a lifeline, because there's such a lot of scrubbing, cleaning of instruments to be done. So you need to have supply and usage areas, make sure the pipes are fairly well concealed, and there needs to be a gradient from the operation theater to your drainage area. Now, as per some regulations, all outflow from the operation theater needs to be treated before it is let out into the public drainage system. So you may need to collect the scrub and the OT cleaning solutions before you actually let it into it. So you may need maybe a PVC tank where you would put in your hypochlorite solution, maybe maintain it for the appropriate time before you discharge it into public drainage systems. Water supply for the operation theater is extremely important. Preferably have a separate RO plant. Some people have these domestic RO plants near the scrub area, works equally well. This is important because the quality of the water that is available to us across India is extremely variable, and the TDS value, which is basically the solution thickness of the particles inside the water, can actually vary significantly. So the AC venting and placement of external units needs to be planned, because your pipes are going to run across the roof. So do that initially before you put up the vertical structures. There are of course different fresh air requirements for OT air exchange and patient recovery areas. Remember that you need an air exchange of between 20 to 25 inside the operation theater, and that Kumran will touch upon more in detail. Always preferably plan for a separate AC unit for the operation theater so that the cooling can be more robust. Now, this is a single operation theater. This is just an enlarged view of what I was talking about. That is, you have your ward on this side. The patient comes in. This is your cleaning areas. This is your sterile operation theater areas. If you have multiple operation theaters, if you're building a file with 2 or 3 operation theaters, make sure your corridors are fairly well connected, so that you have a central sterilization which can supply the sterile instruments to both the operation theaters at the same time. In OT planning, I think the walls, there are multiple varieties. It's like buying your dress material. You can buy cotton, linen. Same way, even in walls, you have steel, puff walls. You can do wall with paints. That also works equally well. Clean room lights with access to roof is important. You can have roof-hung air handling units also. These are now fairly common. Some people prefer an external unit, which will be then need to be kept on the roof, so you need to provide space for that. If you're putting on the first, your operation theater is on the first floor and you have a terrace on the second floor, that is ideal, because the distance that the vents have to travel is very less. You can have interconnecting vents. I think that Kumran will touch upon more, but there are slight variations in different types of air handling units as well. It's important that you plan from floor up. I think when we planned our operation theater, we did the flooring first, because we were putting vinyl on the floor. So when the vendor came, he said he would need to actually put a layer of cement on the floor, which even though we had tiles, because the sticking is important. So he actually put cement, which was about half a centimeter, and on top of that we actually put the vinyl, which is actually a good idea, because the chance of having bubbles under the vinyl and the stickiness of the vinyl is much, much better if you do this. Always, of course, have a seamless non-porous material, anything that will not really absorb. You can use multiple materials. People have used granite. People also use steel. For the flooring, vinyl is fairly uniform. Also important to have skirting, so that cleaning is important. And of course, you need to have safety against static charge. Most vendors now know about it. That is, you'll have running copper wires under the vinyl, which will avoid the chance of static. Now, these are different material options, and this is the one on the left is basically puff panels, and you can make out the risers with the AHU on top, and then you have a central pendulum. This is steel, where this is a good idea of actually marking the floor with the use of different color vinyl, so you know where the flow of the air is coming. and you have steel walls with the integrated TV channel. This is Dr. Kumran's OT with steel and a combination of steel and granite, which also works quite well. RO water plant can be kept on the roof so that you have flow, or you can even keep it in an elevated area so that you have a gradient to reach the operation theatre. Now this is important in terms of water quality, and when you look at different water qualities, preferable that you do it before you, at the source, when you get it from either the metro or you're getting tanker water, and as soon as you actually do the RO water, you need to make sure that there is a difference in the content, and because if the content is very high, you may need to use slightly different filters, and the filters are based on the quality of the water. Now, when you're planning for the infrastructure, I think a very important part is in terms of electrical load planning. Plan for a capacity of at least future requirements, additional autoclave, ETO, plasmas. Plan for a fire alarm. I think lighting is also required for the operation theatre. Provision for a backup generator is ideal. And if you're having very critical equipment, you need to have an online UPS. Location preferable of the generator needs to be on a raised level in case of floods, and have circuit breakers to avoid surge, because we burnt our hands about 3 years back. Lighting has multiple parts: general, surgical recording, intensity, and emergency powers, and all basically need to be connected. You need to have telephone wires. Now you have wires which can carry multiple signals as well. This is one wattage calculation being done for an operation theatre, including the OPD. And this was done for us, and you can make out that we had, this is for calculation of the DG, where we also did the wattage calculation and converted into the kilowatts. Now we have almost a 50 kV generator just for the whole unit, which supports the operation theatre and the OPD. Just one more minute. In terms of patient evacuation plan, you need to have that both for medical and non-medical emergencies, and biomedical waste disposable as per prevalent norms, both for solid and liquid. And I think that's a fairly well elucidated these days. I think in terms of infrastructure, 260 square feet of main OT area is compulsory, and a height of 9 to 10 square feet. You need to have a seamless surface, adequate separate and entry exit points, and hermetically sealed doors. Lighting and electrical planning I've already touched upon. The zones in OT complex, and I'll conclude with this, is fairly well known: protective, clean zone, aseptic zone, and disposal zone. These need to be mapped out at the time of planning. In interest of time, I will go on to the next speaker, and if there's anything else which I missed out, we can discuss it in the panel discussion. Thank you so much.